Hello, hello.
Hi everyone. I hope that you had the chance to join our webinar today, where we're going to talk about our adventure in Colombia. We flew to Colombia the 1st of January. I think it was probably the cheapest flight that you could get at this time of the of the pandemic and everything, because no one was flying exactly in the morning of the first day of the year. But we managed to get this way to Colombia, and we have spent a month over there, where we have been meeting with lots of interesting education organizations. Luz and David, by the way.
Yes, and we are both working on a project called Evolving Education. So, 2 years ago, we started visiting different innovative schools around the world. Now we have reached 12 different countries and more than 100 educators. And we have been interviewing them to capture and how to teach values and competencies that can prepare the students for the challenges of the now or the future.
Yeah. And as you can imagine, the pandemic did put a stop to our travels, and that actually it was a moment to reflect and think, how can we make the best out of all these collective learnings that we have been gathering. So we are having a lot of fun on one hand, developing a documentary film to talk about what's the goal of education and how this is exploring different cultures. And on the other hand, we realized that obviously with more than 100 interviews with educational leaders, there was a lot of valuable content.
Yeah, you cannot fit them all in a movie.
No, it's impossible. So with that, we are building learning experiences for educators, where to interact with all these different perspectives and experiment in your context, in your classroom, to find out what makes sense for you out of all these different ways to solving the same problems, different type of topics that we have been asking them about. So that's something that it's in the process. But today, what we're going to be talking about is innovative education in Colombia. And I think we have some viewers already, so we're going to try this. We are going to share in the comment section a voting link where we have 8 different topics, and you can log in there, and you can
Check which one do you want to
yeah.
to hear about first.
Yeah, so it's like a multiple option test. There are 8 options. You can choose up to 3. So I'm gonna make my selection as well.
Oh, you're selecting yours. So yeah, that's a summary more or less of all the things that we have visited in Colombia.
And I'm gonna try to share the screen. Can we share the screen? No, it doesn't seem like it. Okay. It's probably a way. Anyways, maybe we can do a start.
Yes.
And yeah, the idea was that out of these 8 topics, to give you the chance to choose how to prioritize them and in which order. But anyways, we'll run through them. So let's start maybe with socio-emotional skills. Why not? So to talk about socio-emotional skills, we're going to tell you about Co School, and this is an organization that is based in Bogota. And we talked with 2 of their leading team, Henry and Nicole. And well, socio-emotional skills, what they are things such as self-awareness, empathy, determination, creativity, skills that truly can transform our lives. And there's already a lot of studies that show that things like emotional intelligence have a bigger impact into your success in your career than intelligence or measured as the IQ. And the cool thing about socio-emotional skills is that they can be developed. It's not something that you're just born with them. You can develop them a long time in your lives. But we know, and we all know, that in schools this is not the top topic that is discussed around. So we asked them, Nicole and Henry, what it is the challenge to develop and to teach socio-emotional skills. They are experts in this because they have been running workshops in Colombia directly with children, where they develop them, and they're also now developing trainings for teachers. And in fact, in their website, which we'll leave in the comments, you can find lots of free resources. So they said that one of the key challenges is that socio-emotional skills is not a top priority in the schools. Everyone talks about math and history and everything else, but this is not something that the leadership team and all the teachers are discussing on a daily basis. And the second is that it seems like a very complex subject, as while it's actually common sense, but maybe it's not so obvious unless you focus on how to integrate them in the classroom. And a metaphor that they use that I really liked is that socio-emotional skills is not something else to add to the plate of the teacher, something else to deal with in addition to all the many other things that you have to work on, but it's the plate itself. It's something that can be integrated in anything that you're doing through simple things such as developing a vocabulary, for instance, to talk about emotions. And again, this is not about giving a class about empathy or writing a thesis about it. It's about simply when there's a conflict, when there's a point of reflection, a moment of confusion, asking your students, how do you feel? Can you put some words to it? What are you experiencing it? And helping us to understand our own feelings and our own emotions in that process. Things like self-awareness start from oneself. So it's not something that you can just teach unless you are in that same process of self-discovery. And in the case of self-awareness, it means also showing yourself vulnerable, because as you get to know yourself, we all realize that we are not perfect, that there are many things that we are not good at, or that we don't know very well how to deal with. So, and that kind of vulnerability in the room, it enables the students also to be themselves and to get to know themselves a little bit better. Another of the tips that they shared with us and that really resonated with us was experimentation, that we learn more about our emotions or about ourselves, of the way we relate with the world, with we interact with the different. We interact with things that are not like us. And we have experienced that a lot as we travel through different cultures, and we realized that we had behaviors and patterns that we didn't even know that they were there, and we were just aware because in the culture that we were living at that point, that wasn't common. And then it made us think, so that must be something of because I'm Spanish, or because of my family, or because of the way I think, or something. And obviously, you cannot just take a flight and fly the whole classroom to China to have one of these experiences. But there's a lot of easy ways to do this, right? Through documentaries, through films, through literature. Literature is full of dealing with complex emotions and subjects about relationships. So that's an easy way, I think, to enter into that field. And one of the reasons why we think that socio-emotional skills are not a top priority for everyone is because they are not measured. In a way, we get what we measure, right? And I asked them that, how can we measure socio-emotional skills so that we care more about them? And what Nicole told us was, well, be careful about evaluations because they also have an impact in our socio-emotional status. They can impact our for instance, our self-confidence. But if you really want to use evaluation as a way to help the students to know themselves better and to keep on improving, then maybe one way could be something called 360 review. Which is actually something that some companies use as well. And it's pretty much about asking feedback about your behaviors to your peers, so your colleagues in the class, to some people, maybe in your family, your parents, your teachers, and then also yourself. You reflect on some of these skills. Where do you think you are at? What you need to develop more or less? And through that, you get quite a wide variety of perspectives that help you to reflect on the areas that you want you can improve more. And yeah, and it's truly an evaluation made to improve the learning process. well, with all this talking, there was this big question that was in the air, right? And it's, is this a responsibility really of the schools to teach socio-emotional skills? Isn't this something that is for the families or something that should be done at home? And we had quite a lively discussion among the four of us. Um, and in a way, we're all in the same page that if, as a child, you spend 6, 8 hours a day in the school, then the school is a major place where you are developing yourself, you're developing your character, and therefore we cannot leave outside of the classroom the development of such important skills, such as socio-emotional skills. And as educators, part of our responsibility is to be kind of a moral compass for the students to not just develop incredibly efficient machines, but people that can think critically and can value and empathize with other people, with nature, with our environment, and truly be fully rounded um, citizens and and humans overall. Well, that was our discussion with co-school about socio-emotional skills.
Mhm. Yeah.
And what are we going with next?
We can go with Acaciarte. This is a really nice project. So, Acaciarte is a theater and dance project that takes place in Las Acacias School, which is a public school in Ciudad Bolívar, towards the south of Bogota. And it's a really vulnerable community with high levels of violence and low resources. And we met Angela and Gustavo. Both are teachers in this public school, and both are passionate about the power of arts to transform society. So they started this project 2 years ago, and they started with a really diverse group of children. In one hand, they have the children that were passionate about theater and dance, and they wanted to learn that. But also, they have students that were classified as academic and behavioral problems, and migrant students that have been displaced either from the conflict in Colombia or from the situation in Venezuela. So this is a tough situation, a tough environment to create a team. And Gustavo and Angela were able to create a safe space for the students that was free of judgment, free of marks and standards, and the only rule was to respect each other. So, how were they able to transform a group of people that didn't know each other in a cohesive team that actually worked together? So they use the arts. They use theatrical games, corporal exploration through dance and crafts, and they saw how the barriers started breaking down, and the students began to interact with each other, to recognize each other as individuals and also as a team, and finally a team mindset appeared. So the first year, they created a play in English, and during the pandemic, they really have to change and reinvent everything. So they started doing online workshops, and the workshops actually became the tools for the students. And they started creating videos, doing dramatic readings, and they even did a movie in which Santa Claus suffers the effects of COVID restrictions, and he has to figure out everything. So they got a YouTube channel, and check it out. It's actually a really fun movie. And one thing, or there are several things that we cannot ignore the impact that this project has had in the whole community. The first thing is that all the students that were involved in the project improved their academic results and also their behavior in the school, because they found a new way to relate to the school. They found a new way to leave the school. Then the students improve also their self-confidence and emotional intelligence. And I think arts in particular, like theater and dance, are wonderful tools to actually change your shoes and be in the skin of someone else, and to develop that empathy and trust on yourself. A part of others' competencies such as communication, reading, and interacting with others are things that they were able to develop there. And finally, another really important impact was in the families. The families were completely involved in recording the kids, in building the stage, the lights, the dressing. So the quality of the family time drastically improved. And this impact not only stayed within the family, but also transform the full community. Since families started supporting each other, helping each other with the dressing and so on, and that changed the dynamics of that community. So there is something really special about Acacia Arte, and is that they work on something that we normally forget. That is what David just spoke about. Is that development of social emotional part, that human part that we all have. Um, and there was something that captured my attention, and is that Acacia Arte is able to give that space to the students to be themselves, to build their own identity, their own behavior, their own way to see the world, even their own definition of happiness, ones that actually lives in the present, not in a far future. So the freedom that gives the artistic process allows the student to develop autonomy and self-awareness, to take control of their own decisions, and to learn to see each other, being able to see the potential of actually being different and to learn from each other. And that's fantastic. That's
Yeah.
something that we really want to integrate inside the schools.
Yeah, and it was amazing that this is out of two teachers in a public schools going out of their way on Saturdays, working extra hours to do something amazing for their students. So it was really inspiring to get to meet them.
Yeah. Now we can speak about Benposta.
Okay, so Benposta. So Benposta is an organization that's been around for a long time. It's called Ben Posta. Okay, so just to remind the name, and they do something really tricky, and it is that they work with children out of that are in conflicting areas. So Colombia has had kind of a major armed conflict where there were guerrillas, paramilitaries, the government, the liberals, the conservative, many different fractions of armed groups that were fighting with each other, and obviously the families, the communities were the ones that were most affected by all of this, and the children in them, which end up being recruited by these armed groups or kidnapped or worse. And Benposta comes around in Colombia with this concept of the circus, and particularly the human pyramid, where the strongest are in the bottom of the pyramid, then there's the weakest one. So those that are a bit weaker on the top of the pyramid, we have the children. We have the children that are the ones to be taken care of the most. And what they do in Memposa with this mindset of putting the children on top of the pyramid is to look for these areas of the country where there's still conflict and where they are endangered, and to build protective environments and build connections with kind of community organizations such as schools and churches to identify those children that are at risk, so they can go and give a hand to them. For them, schools are really protective environments because when the children are in the schools, they build social connections with the other students and with the teachers, and they end up kind of moving away from all that conflict and all that violence. And the quarantine, because of the pandemic, have been a really tough time for them, because since the children were not at the school, sometimes they didn't have enough resources at home, and they were an easier target for the armed groups. And they have been supporting them economically and with activities and many other things. And we asked them about their connections with the schools within the rural areas. And what they told us is that one of the challenges that define them to make the schools more appealing for the students is that they find that the information and the things that are taught in the schools are not connected with the context of the children. So they told us, for instance, one example where could have a child that wakes up early in the morning before sunrise, milks the cattle, bring the milk to the market, sells it, and then bring the money back home. And then he goes to school. And when he goes to school, they tell him that he doesn't know enough math. Or they're talking to him about some other context, some other type of information that is not related at all with his view of the world. They would rather more if the school will build on top of the know-how of the children, and that way they will absorb it as something that it belongs to them. And one quote that Jose Luis, who is the person we interviewed in the post, that told us was that you cannot prepare them for the day of tomorrow if we don't allow them to build their own present. So in any ways, they work with these children in conflict areas, and when they identify they are really at risk of being kidnapped or of being recruited by the armed groups, they take them away from there voluntarily, obviously, and to their offices in nearby Bogota. And this is a big campus with dorms and so on. And something interesting is that when a new child arrives, they don't treat them as a case to be treated. Of course they have psychologists and pedagogies, but it's not like there's a new case to be treated here and we're going to have intensive therapy with him or her, but rather they allow the community of youth and the community of teenagers and children to absorb that new person into their community and into the way they work together. In fact, this community of children is self-managed. I mean, they have this structure, this democratic structure that resembles like a small village, where you have the mayor and the representatives for sports and for hygiene and for cleaning and environment, and they run their kind of elections with proposals to improve the place. So it's really nice to see. And in addition of all of these, they also have a parliament where anyone can bring proposals to improve the situation, or they can bring challenges and things that they don't like, with a key difference that when you bring a challenge, when you bring something, a complaint, you have to bring a proposal, you have to bring a potential solution, unless it's beyond your capabilities, but usually you can, which is something that strike me because as citizens of a democratic country, I have never been taught that. When I reached 18, I was told, okay, now you can vote, but I was never told that. In addition to complain, which is what we do most of the time, we can also come up with proposals and solutions to improve our society. And that's something that they are actively engaged on a daily basis. They also manage their own conflicts. If you think about it, they come from really violent scenarios with lots of degradation of human rights, serious degradations. And in this community where they are managing themselves, managing their interactions, they also manage their conflicts. They have smaller groups within the dorms where they talk regularly. I think it was on a weekly basis about things that weren't going wrong, well, or things that need to improve. They had some larger groups based on ages, ranges of ages. I think it was 8 to 11 and things like this, like 3 age groups. And then if a conflict wasn't resolution in any of those two groups, then they could take them to the parliament where everyone could discuss together and see whether this was, a behavior, something that just happened, or a pattern, something that was coming back repeatedly, and then they needed to think about some other ways to deal with it. What I love about Mempostra is that they think about childhood not as a waiting room to be waiting to be an adult, but allowing them the right to participate and to take control of their lives in the present. And I think that's a skill that's going to take them, that's going to last for the rest of their lives.
And it's also really essential for us as citizens to learn how to deal with all that responsibilities that we have, and somehow we don't use them well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really nice. We are going to speak now about Escuela Nueva.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was good. We
Yeah.
spoke with Vicky Colbert, the
Uh-huh.
founder of Escuela Nueva, about 30 years ago already. So
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
kind of a long-standing organization.
Yeah. So this foundation, as David said, it was created more than 30 years ago to support the schools in rural Colombia that counted with very little resources. So in this environment, actually, sometimes the teacher have to take care simultaneously of children of different ages and at different stages of their learning process. So as you can imagine, it was really hard for the teachers to cater to the needs of every child. So what did they do? So Escuela Nueva created then learning guides that the children could use autonomously. This is each child could learn on their own, following the guidance of their guidebooks. And the role of the teacher then was move from one group to the other, trying to solve and support that, to solve the questions and support that learning. Vicky shared with us three key elements that their guides have. And the first one is that everything starts with a question. So we need to trigger curiosity and the intrinsic motivation of the students to learn about a particular subject. Then the second thing is that learning happens through dialogue with other children. So the guides are designed to be used in groups, and the children are interacting with each other all the time and building that knowledge together. And the third thing is that there are activities and games to practice actually what they have learned. So, and they have conducted like multiple evaluation of these methods, and they have amazing results. And the UNESCO recognized their work, and now it's being used in different countries, such as Vietnam, for example. Another really interesting thing, and I think it has massive potential. They call it micro centers, and these are spaces for educators from different schools to come together and discuss their challenges, their successes, their things that they struggle with, and help each other. So we have seen this implementing in other countries, for example, like India, and there's no doubt that that a support team is essential for that educational improvement. In fact, there are many studies that show that the relevance of a team of teachers working together towards a particular mission can have a massive impact in the students' marks. So this is something that we really sometimes we forget, but it's really important that everybody in that team is working together, and we are comfortable, and we are helping each other and learning from each other all the time. And those communities, I think that they can have a massive impact, and it's something that we don't do that often, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, that's something that we're thinking about implementing as well as we develop our learning platform for educators to build a community of educators engaged into continuous improving process and to give each other feedback and support and share what works for you or not and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Anyways, let's continue then with the next topic, which is about self-directed education. For this, we talk with Julio Fontan, who is one of the creators of the relational education method. Julio was actually his father created the Fontan School in Medellin, and then he went on to run at the school. He created another one in Bogota, and then kind of developed this method based on the things that had worked for them in the school, and now have been implemented in many other schools, in public schools in Colombia, but also now in Chile and in Spain. So it's proving to be quite kind of scalable and able to replicate in other places. And what is self-directed education? Well, the way that Julio put it to us was that students can have the potential to take control of their own learning and their own lives. But he said for this to happen, the environment, the learning environment needs to change. And he said that because he said that traditional schools replicate an industrial model of production designed to generate obedient workers rather than independent thinkers. And actually, if you think about it, the schooling system as we know it was developed during the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom as a way to train workers for the factories. Um, but the challenge is that our world doesn't need that many obedient workers anymore. Those tasks are automated already, or they are going to be automated in the coming years. What we need are more creative people, more entrepreneurial people, able to create their own futures, and able with a strong, and also with a strong moral values, so that we are moving in the right direction. You know. Well, so how does this actually work in practice? So in Fontana School, the children are not grouped by ages, but by levels of autonomy. And these levels of autonomy is not something that you necessarily progress from 1 to 2 to 3. There's not an scale. They're just different in nature based on how autonomously a child feels comfortable learning. And for instance, the group that has the highest level of autonomy, they even choose their own teachers that facilitate their learning. Initially, they had books through which they were learning independently. Now they use, of course, a lot of resources on the internet because there's tons of things already there. There's no need for anyone to be transmitting information. The information is already there and anyone can read it. So that's the way they're organized in these groups. And these groups, they meet every 15 days where they set up their priorities and their goals and responsibilities for the next 15 days. That's at a group level, but at an individual level, when anyone arrives to the school, the first thing that they do is that they also plan their day. They plan the things that they're going to do in groups, like, for instance, conversations in English to practice the language, the things that they're going to achieve individually, and also there are times for resting and for having fun. And this is something that Julio emphasized a lot, the importance of having fun and of having a break. He said, all of us are different in the way that we need to rest and the time that we need to kind of come back to being in a good level of energy to be performing. Anyone that has been working knows this. So how can we pretend that all the children have a rest at the same time and for the same amount of time? There are those that like to work for long hours and then having a long break, and there are others that like to have a break every 30 minutes or so. That depends on each person. So they allow them to do this. And in terms of having fun, rather than just having kind of an open court and where you just play football, usually that's what happens in many schools, they started with this concept of clubs, which I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's also very easy to implement in different places, and it's pretty much just groups of students that are interested about the same topic, and then they come together to play and learn around that topic. So they have a club. They said the first one that was set up was about dancing, and they now have a club about robotics, another one about discussions about films. About anything that you can imagine, you can find people that have some common interest and that we can enjoy that area together. They have about 30, I think, now in their school. And as you can imagine, with this self-directed education, the pandemic didn't affect them that much, actually, because he said, well, the children were already autonomously learning in the school, so they continue autonomously learning in their houses, and the teachers continue with the role of answering questions and so on. In fact, they have scaled from, I think it was 50,000 or so students in Colombia to more than 100,000 now, because more schools wanted to implement this same methodology. With all these changes happening in the school, I had to ask him, well, what happens with the educators, with the teacher? What's their role in there? And he said, in self-directed education, the first ones to win are the educators, because they stop being passively transmitting information every year, the same thing, and they become a lot, and their job becomes a lot more interesting, a lot more diverse and dynamic. And they have kind of two types of educators based on what you like most, in a way. One will be kind of a mentor or a coach that is closer to the personal development of the children or the students, that help them reflect on what they want to learn and what they learn about themselves and things like that. And another one that they call an analyst, and it's pretty much a specialist on a subject, someone that's really passionate about chemistry or really passionate about history, and is researching about it. It's looking for new documentaries and books, and kind of motivating the students about, oh, look what I found about this, and also being around to answer their questions, because as they work autonomously, they ask for your help. Imagine that difference from being there kind of enforcing something that you have to learn to be asked to come because we want your support. So that's a thing, something wonderful that that I would like to see and experience more.
Yep.
Okay, so that was about the school Fontan, and now what are we going to talk
Now
about?
we are going to Calapa.
Calapa, learning community outside Bogota.
Yeah, they are in the middle of the forest, so it's a beautiful place. And the project of Calapa started with the work of 7 mothers that were worried about the education of their children. And Calapa aims for an integral education. What is integral education? That means that they take care of the physical, the mental, and the emotional development of the students. For that, there is a full structure in the school that I'm gonna try to summarize and tell you a little bit. But some of the let's start with the teachers, for example. So they have mentors and facilitators. The mentors, as David said, they are pretty similar to what he said, is they walk with the students to achieve that social emotional development, while the facilitators make learning easy and suggest meaningful experiences. Then another super unique characteristic of Calapa is that they base the learning as experiential learning or learning by doing. So the core of the experiential learning is how to develop meaningful learning experiences that fully involve the individual, like body, mind, and emotions. So normally these experiences involve creating a challenge that takes the students out of their comfort zone. An examples that they told us was actually that the caretaker of the school had bees and he was producing honey, but at some point the honey production stopped. So students started investigating and realized that the bees were in danger of extinction, and their numbers were really decreasing in that area. So they started looking for the flowers that the bees prefer and planting them around and measuring how many the bees numbers, if they were increasing or decreasing, and so on. So they enter in a process of observation, experimentation, and evaluation similar to the scientific method, and they started exploring a question that they have and trying to find solutions by themselves. On learning, they self-manage their learning. Another really which all the students come together and they speak about the different problems that they have, or it's just a space where they have a voice and they can share ideas, solve problems, and keep that process of improvement. Another thing that they have is conflict resolution cycles. I think this is actually super cool because these circles are formed by a team of students that have learned how to deal with conflict. And then when a conflict arises, they all work together to solve that problem. So we met Pablo, which is a 8 years old student, and he was telling us how that conflict resolution cycle work. And he said that the main characteristic that he felt of the circles is that he was listened to. While in other schools, when there was a problem, he was just feeling judged about what happened. Here, he had a space to express his feelings and, reflect where that behavior came from, and then that actually helped to solve the issue. So that's a really
Yeah,
interesting part.
it's really cool to speak. It's usually we interview educators, and because we do film interviews where we capture all these insights, and unless we have kind of a signed copy from the parents, we don't like to film the children unless they are the parents allowed us to. But in this case, we could. And yeah, it was so insightful to hear this 8-year-old child telling us so clearly how he felt so differently when he was listened to, and when he was given a space to kind of reflect on his own behavior. And he told us that he had a lot of trouble before, but that he was getting out of that. He was getting away from violence and from lots of problems in the schools thanks to just being listened to.
Yeah, I remember the last bit that he said. He was saying that when he had problems in the traditional school, they obliged them to be friends again and hug each other. But then they didn't really solve the problem. But now here, actually, the hug is real, and they actually were able to solve that problem and go through, and just by speaking and by listening to others and understanding the other person. And another thing that I think is fantastic is that Calapa is really worried about keep improving all the time. So they have a team of teachers that keep experimenting to develop better practices for their community. And I think Diana, one of the founders, she was mentioning like it's super important to lose the fear of making mistakes, to keep improving and to keep developing things that are actually more beneficial, and trying things. If they don't work, then okay, that didn't work, keep trying and finding your own way to do things. Because Yeah, I don't think there is a way to solve all the problems in education, but there are many ways.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right. All right, so we have two more learning experiences to share with you from Colombia, and the next one is Click Arte, and they are, I think, the best experts that we have ever met in storytelling. They really specialize on building stories. They create books for children to talk about tough issues. Where we have prejudices, where the society is very polarized, and they try to present them as complete as possible with all the voices and in a language in a way that children can learn from them. And one way, the key way I think they have done this is by creating this fiction world called La Aldea, and it's which will translate to the town. And in this town, there are only animals that represent archetypes of society. So there's the corrupt armadillo. There's the fox that thinks that he's more than anyone else because he has money or because of his family or something. There's the parrots that like to talk about other people and spread rumors. And in this town, none of them is a villain or is a hero. Like in real life, we all have our virtues, our imperfections, and you can feel kind of represented by each of those characters in different actions, different things that they do. Because we all wanted to jump the queue at some point. We all have our imperfections. One way how they use this fiction world is to explain the armed conflict in Colombia, which, as I said before, is a really complex subject. I don't feel prepared to explain it, but there's lots of different groups of people that have been in conflict with each other, different guerrillas, paramilitaries, the governments, the narcos, lots of things happen, lots of violence, lots of families affected. So, very polarizing issue for society. And they were given a ton of documents by the government and were asked to develop a tale, a children's book, to explain this conflict. When they went through the documents, they found out that they were pretty biased and they were only telling one side of the story. So they went on to interview the guerrillas, the paramilitaries, the victims, um, and complete that story from different sides. As you can imagine, they now they told us that after all of this, everyone hated them because they all felt that they were talking about other people's views, but they felt that they were providing something that was more holistic and that enabled to talk about the real issues and as complex as it is. And actually, they are being asked now to support in other places, in other parts of the world, even to tell these stories in a way that everyone can understand them and can understand the complexity that there's behind. So, since they are experts in storytelling, I asked them about what tips, what advice they could give to educators to implement in their classroom. And they gave us three top advice. The first one is to make it fun for yourself, not for the kids. They told us if I write a story, if I develop a material or a workshop that I think is going to be engaging for the students, but it's not engaging for myself, then it's not going to be fun for anyone. In,
Yeah, if I don't want to do the activities, the
yeah,
students don't want to do the activities either.
yeah. There's not that many difference at the end of the day between a child and an adult person. We both need to be having fun with what we're doing. The second is to connect it with their lives and with the context of the children. They said that it didn't make any sense to memorize all the names of the rivers or of the neighboring countries if I don't connect it with my history and my identity and the things that make me who I am and the ecosystem that is nurturing me and is providing the food that I eat every day. So these connections are essential to really construct knowledge rather than just memorizing and forgetting almost instantaneously that know-how. And the third one is to create spaces and situations that give rise to more questions than answers. They were tired of this Disney universe where every movie ends up with and they live happy ever after. they like a lot more stories that reflect that are more similar to the real life, and in real life things don't end up so rounded. Not everything is so perfect. There's a lot of contradictions and there's a lot of difficult decisions that need to be taken. And it's hard to say whether you will have taken that decision differently if you were in the same situation. So they really encourage us to think about how to create those open questions that help us learn how to deal with them. More than finding the right answer, how to deal with these complex questions.
Mhm. Yeah,
And yeah,
normally there's not a right answer. No, there's not one. There are probably many, and depending on the situation, then
yeah, that's right. And each person needs to take their own.
their own
And we're
decision.
reaching the end almost of the
Yeah,
talk, and this is we're talking about our last learning expert in this case.
yeah. She is Ana Paulina. She's, yeah, a wonderful woman, and she's mother of four children. And she's a referent in Colombia for education at home. She has created like the family network, like Red en Familia, and now guides other families that want to go through the process of descolarization and homeschooling. And she has also written a book called If the School Wouldn't Exist. So, first of all, we have to clarify some terms. So, when families choose to take their children out of the school, we can be speaking about homeschooling or unschooling. So, homeschooling is about replicating the structure of the school at home with specific times, subjects, and exams. While in unschooling, they design their own methods and they are based on their own interests and needs. So, Anna Paulina was sharing with us that children are curious beings and they learn all the time, everywhere. So learning happens inside and outside the school. So there's not such a strong need to divide knowledge into subjects since everything is connected. So we can focus on exploring questions that are going to lead the learning in many different ways. So she reinforces the importance of inspiring students and encouraging them to explore, to ask questions, to look for their own answers, and to make mistakes in that process is part of learning. So, and there was something that really beautiful that she said that really struck me, and is that when this process starts, there is no difference between learning, playing, and living. So how wonderful is that? Um, she recommended us also two different strategies to work with kids at home. One of them is the unit-based learning and project-based learning. They are very similar, but in the first one, the teacher decides which subjects they are going to work on, while in the project-based learning, the question comes from the students, and they explore and work to solve that problem. In both cases, the learning process is in the students' hands, and they develop a lot of autonomy to work in whatever they decide to. You might also ask, what happened to these kids that are educated outside the formal educational system when they grow up? And we also asked that question to Ana Paulina, and she gave us the example of her daughter that she's at university, she's studying now, and also her son that was working as a programmer, but he learned completely by himself.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And you may ask as well, we are focused on the schools and on education that's reaching most of the kids in the world. That's our focus and where we want to make our contribution. But we find these amazing families where that they are taking care 100%. They are dedicated to the education of the children, and they become amazing pedagogists. So people like Ana Paulina, she's really read pretty much everything that there's out there about education, and it's really inspiring to hear from them and learn as well what has worked for them, what different methodologies. And our work then is how to translate that into the public education system, in the schools, in the education that reaches many children.
Yeah.
All
So
right, so we're
those
reaching the
are, yeah, those are the 8 experiences that we
we
have
wanted
had.
to share.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost 1 hour.
Yes. And just to finish this webinar, we wanted to share with you the three guiding principles that kind of direct everything that we are doing. and they are, the first one is diversity and inclusion. Education is a really complex subject, so we cannot just say that there's one magic solution that's going to be able to be applied everywhere instantaneously, but rather there's a diversity of perspectives, a diversity of opinions, and it's really important to challenge ourselves to get outside the box, things, trying things that are beyond the things that we are used to, and experiment and find out what works in our community, in our context. And that's part of the learning experiences for educators that we are developing. And in the terms of inclusion, we really care both about quality and access to education. So we're going to make these learning experiences available for free to educators in vulnerable in vulnerable communities. Our second value is having fun. Actually, this is something that we experience every day. We love what we're doing. We're really enjoying developing, evolving education, the documentary, the learning platform. And we want anyone that work with us, that collaborate with us, that it starts learning with us about learning, to have fun and to transmit this joy of learning to their students and to their learners. And the third one, it's continuous improvement. We live in a process of every day getting to know ourselves a bit better, um, learning something, and getting a bit better at it. And the best way to be a good educator is to recognize that you can always be a better educator, and with humbleness continue working in that process. And that's what we try to do. We don't feel we have the magic answer for everything. We are capturing all the diversity of methodologies, practices, experiences that we can, and making it a fun experience for you to enjoy. um, so yeah, that's diversity and inclusion, having fun, and continuously improving. Thank you very much for watching us.
Yes.
If you want to get in touch with us and connect, you can send us a message here by Facebook with your email, and we can add you to our newsletter, which we send once a month with updates about the things that we're working on at the moment. And also, I'll leave the link in the comments for the award Andalusian of the Future, which I've been awarded to for the work that we are doing at the moment, in case you want to vote. And this is an award to recognize what we are doing in education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And
Bye.
tomorrow is the Spanish one.
Yeah, if you want to hear us in Spanish talking about the same things, that's tomorrow. Bye.
Bye bye.
Um,